I'm working on putting 12-volt power in the bed of my Gladiator. This Gladiator didn't come with the optional accessory outlet in the bed. Some Gladiators come with a 110-volt outlet, which is installed in this little square area right here. This one didn't come with that. I needed a 12-volt outlet to power a refrigerator, and I added a marine style 12-volt socket. It's got a rubber cover that seals it up when it's not in use, and in order to put that in there, I drilled out a hole in this plastic plug. It's hard to tell because this one has the spray and bed liner, but that's actually a plastic piece right there that pops in. I didn't want to drill through the sheet metal of the bed because I didn't want to, deal with any rust issues, so I decided to drill through that plastic piece. And to do that, I used just one of these step bits because it's easy to drill a hole whatever size you need to drill with a step bit. Once the hole is drilled and the socket's mounted, then comes the fun part where you get to wire it all up. And the easiest way to wire up 12-volt power is just to run wires straight from your outlet to the battery on a dedicated circuit. And for the circuit that I'm setting up, I only needed a 10 amp fuse. That's all that was called for what I'm using it for. So it depends on what you use. You might need, a bigger fuse or a larger gauge wire depending on what you're running. But for my use, 14 gauge wire and a 10 amp fuse was sufficient. And the type of wire that I like to use to do that is a wire that comes together with two conductors. So you've got your red and black, positive, negative, and then you've got a coating that wraps around both of those wires together. So you've got multiple layers of protection. You've got the regular insulation around the copper wires, and then you've got this other sheath that goes around those. So when you put your ends on to connect to your socket, assortment of different fittings here. These are spade type connectors that crimp onto the wire, and they're heat shrink, so you can heat shrink that, seal it up, make it waterproof. Once that's connected to there, figure out how much wire you need, and it's pretty straightforward to run the wiring along the chassis of the Jeep. There's other wiring harnesses that run along the frame rail down the passenger side of these Gladiators. So once you have the wire coming out from the bedside, underneath of the bed, you can, I don't know if you can get under there with the camera at all, kind of see where it comes out there. Then you can use zip ties to attach it to the wiring harness that runs all along the frame rail underneath the Gladiator. And all the way above this frame rail, and then when you get to the front part where the exhaust comes down in the engine area, there's aluminum heat shielding around a lot of the wiring harness there. So you want to try to tuck your wire behind that heat shielding, and you can use extra insulation around the wire too, which I can show you a piece of that here in a minute. But once it's up there, then you run it up into the engine bay. Once you get your wire into the engine bay, here's the end of my harness here where it comes up into the engine bay. I've got my inline fuse here. So I've got my 10 amp inline fuse here, so I've got my power going straight to the battery. And then I'm using one of these chassis ground points over here. These Gladiators have multiple points for grounding over here, and the battery is grounded directly to the chassis here. So you can either go straight to the negative lead of the battery or just ground it right to the grounding posts here. Made for a cleaner install to attach the ground there and attach the positive to the battery. It's all tucked down in there so you don't have too many wires on top of the battery. And so with that setup, you've got 12 volts of power to the bed at all times. Doesn't matter if the ignition's on or off. You don't have to worry about it going through any of the factory computer systems. It's just dedicated socket, plug your fridge in, and you're good to go. Okay, here is that piece of wire covering that I was talking about that you can use. This is similar to your standard plastic split loom, but this is a nylon mesh, and it's split down the middle so it opens up to get wire in there. But I like to use this a lot better than just a regular type of plastic loom because it's super flexible, bends easily, it's a lot easier to get the wire in it. And it holds up better to heat cycling. The regular plastic over time cracks and gets brittle and just crumbles after a few years. This stuff's a little bit harder to cut, which is good because it protects the wire underneath from abrasions if it's routed somewhere where it's rubbing against a metal edge. You can cut it with a sharp razor, or you can use a hot knife to cut it with. Sometimes I'll just cut it with my pocket knife and it gets kind of frayed, and then I'll take a lighter and melt the end so that it doesn't continue fraying. I use this over top of this wiring in areas where the wire might get pinched or it might rub against something, or in areas where it might be exposed to excessive heat, like underneath of the hood, or if it has to be, you know, within a few inches of the exhaust system or something whenever you're running wiring. So it's always good to have that extra layer of protection whenever you're adding wiring to your vehicle.